I accidentally saw my mother naked, cheating on my father with her lover. Because of this, I lost my inheritance of $2,500,000 and moved to another city. She found me, and the worst happened. My life took a nosedive when I was 9 years old. It all started the day my mom, Linda, married Richard. At first, I thought it might actually be nice, maybe even exciting, to have a bigger family. After all, my dad walked out on us when I was 3, so for years, it had just been Mom and me. But Richard didn't come alone. He brought his son, Alex, who was my age but acted like he ran the place. At first, things seemed all right. Richard was polite, and Alex put on a good show, acting all friendly. But that didn't last long. Within a few months, the house started to feel less like home and more like a battleground. I was the odd one out, an outsider in my own family. Alex had this way of twisting things around to make it seem like everything was my fault, and somehow, everyone believed him. If something got broken, he'd point the finger at me. If something went missing, it was obviously because I took it. Whenever I tried to explain myself, Richard would give me one of his long lectures about how I needed to be a good daughter and respect my new family. It didn't matter what the truth was. Then Alex started taking my things. At first, it was small stuff, a bracelet my grandma had given me, a book I was halfway through, even my favorite hoodie. He was sneaky about it too, always making sure I couldn't prove he'd done it. When I told Mom, she brushed it off, telling me not to stir up trouble. "Don't make waves, honey," she'd say. "Richard's trying his best, and Alex is just adjusting. Be patient." Things only got worse when Noah came along. Noah was my half-brother, Mom and Richard's baby, and from the moment he was born, the whole house revolved around him. Don't get me wrong, I loved Noah with all my heart. But his arrival made me feel like I didn't fit in anymore. The breaking point came when they decided to turn my room into the nursery. Instead of moving Alex to make space, I was the one who had to give up my room. They sent me to the basement. And let me tell you, it wasn't some cozy finished basement with fluffy rugs and nice lighting. No, it was damp, smelled like mildew, and had more spiders than I could count. Mom tried to spin it like it was some great privilege. "You're old enough to have your own space now," she said. Smiling like that would make me feel better. But it didn't. It felt like I was being pushed out of the family. That first night down there, I cried into my pillow, trying to muffle the sound so Noah wouldn't hear. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop. All I could think about was everything I'd lost. My room, my mom's attention, my place in the family. And somehow, things kept spiraling. Anytime something went wrong, the blame always landed on me. One time, a lamp in the living room got broken while I was at school. I wasn't even home, but Richard didn't care. He grounded me for a week and gave me another one of his speeches about responsibility. It didn't matter that I had nothing to do with it. Alex stood behind him with that smug smirk plastered across his face. I couldn't take it anymore. I started avoiding everyone as much as possible. Dinner. I'd scarf it down like I was late for something and make a beeline back to the basement, pretending I was drowning in homework. There were so many times I wanted to tell Mom just how bad things were, how lonely and invisible I felt. But every time I tried, she brushed me off. She'd defend Richard and Alex, telling me I needed to be more patient, more understanding. It was like she didn't see how much I was hurting, or maybe she just didn't care. Days bled into months, and I learned to keep my mouth shut. Complaining only made things worse. Alex had this talent for twisting every situation to make me look like the bad guy, and Mom and Richard fell for it every single time. I felt like I was yelling into a void, my voice swallowed whole, unheard and unseen. The small stuff piled up until it felt crushing. I couldn't leave anything out without it disappearing or getting wrecked. My books ended up covered in scribbles, my clothes went missing, and even my school supplies were mysteriously ruined. It was like I wasn't allowed to have anything that was just mine. One day, I confronted Alex. I was so angry I couldn't hold it in anymore. He just laughed in my face, daring me to say something to anyone. He knew I wouldn't. By the time I hit 13, I was completely numb to it all. The blame, the loneliness, the unfairness. It was like my heart had built this shell just to get through the day. This wasn't how a family was supposed to be, but I didn't know what to do about it. Growing up in that house felt like serving a life sentence without a chance for parole. When I turned 16, I was done pretending. Nothing was going to change. Home wasn't home, it was just a place I survived in. The only way to keep myself sane was to stay away as much as I could. I started treating the house like it was cursed. Most days after school, I didn't even bother going straight home. Instead, I'd head to my friend Emily's house. Emily was one of the few people who really got it. She'd seen how Alex treated me and knew how Mom always ignored it. Her family wasn't perfect either, but her mom, Mrs. Taylor, was everything mine wasn't: warm, kind, and welcoming. She treated me like I was part of their family, even when I felt like I didn't deserve it. I practically lived at their place. Mrs. Taylor never asked questions. She just invited me to stay for dinner like it was the most natural thing in the world. On nights I couldn't bring myself to go home, she'd leave an extra blanket on the couch, like she knew I'd accidentally fall asleep there. She saw through me, even though I never said outright how much I dreaded going back to that cold, miserable basement. When I wasn't at Emily's, I was working. I got my first job at 16 at this little diner called the Silver Spoon. It wasn't glamorous by any stretch. Half the time, I was scrubbing grease off pans or wiping down sticky tables. But it was mine. The tips were small, but I saved every dollar I could. And at the diner, I met Jason, the cook at the Silver Spoon, was one of the few bright spots in my life back then. He was in his early 20s and had this kind of rough-around-the-edges charm, like the guy who'd been through some hard knocks but still found a reason to laugh. Jason wasn't just a co-worker, he became like an older brother to me. He had this way of noticing when I was down, and he'd crack a joke or say something that made me feel just a little lighter. "Kid, don't let them grind you down," he'd say, flipping pancakes like it was no big deal. "One day you'll be out of there, and none of this will matter." I clung to that idea. Jason's words became my mantra. One day, I'll be out of here. That hope was the only thing that got me through the worst days. I stayed late at work every chance I got, volunteering for extra shifts just to avoid going home. The diner became my safe haven, a place where I could breathe. By the time I turned 17, I knew I had to get out. I didn't have a solid plan, but I started saving every penny I could. I didn't even tell Emily or Jason about it. The fewer people who knew, the safer my plan felt. My escape became the only thing I cared about. Then one night, Alex crossed a line I couldn't ignore. I came home late after a long shift, hoping to sneak into the basement unnoticed. But when I opened the door, there he was, sitting on my bed with one of my journals in his hands. He was flipping through it, reading aloud and laughing like it was the funniest thing he'd ever seen. "Get out!" I yelled, my voice trembling with rage. He looked up at me, smirking, and waved the journal like it was a toy. "Relax, Sarah. What's the big deal? It's not like anyone cares about your whiny little diary." Something in me snapped. I lunged for the journal, but he yanked it out of reach, holding it above his head like a prize. I didn't even think. I shoved him as hard as I could. He stumbled back, losing his balance, and crashed into a box of my things. The sound was loud enough to wake the whole house. Within seconds, Mom and Richard were rushing downstairs. "What's going on here?" Mom demanded, her eyes darting between Alex and me. Alex, of course, wasted no time playing the victim. "She just attacked me for no reason," he whined, clutching his arm like I'd shattered it. My blood boiled. He was going through my stuff. I shouted, pointing at the journal still lying on the floor. But Mom didn't even hesitate. "Sarah, what is wrong with you?" she snapped. "Apologize to your brother." "Right. Now." I stared at her, stunned. "Are you serious? After everything he's done, I'm the one in trouble." "Enough," Richard barked, stepping in with his face red and his voice like thunder. "Go to your room." "My room?" I shot back. "You mean the basement? It's not even a room, it's a storage closet." That was it for me. That night, I decided I wasn't waiting until I turned 18. I was done. I started packing whatever little I had, some clothes, personal items, and a few things that actually felt like mine. I stuffed everything into an old duffel bag, not sure where I'd go but knowing anywhere was better than staying there. The final straw came the night before my birthday. I'd finally worked up the courage to tell Mom I was leaving. I waited until Richard and Alex were out of the house, hoping that without them around, she might actually hear me for once. "Mom, I can't do this anymore," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. My hands were shaking, but I clenched them into fists to hide it. "I'm moving out." She looked at me like I'd just confessed to robbing a bank. "What are you talking about? You're too young to live on your own." "I'm 18 tomorrow," I replied, my voice firmer now. "Legally, I can leave." Her expression softened for a moment, but only a little. "Sarah, where will you even go? You don't have any money." "I've been saving," I said quickly, cutting her off. "I have enough to get started. I'll figure it out." She sighed and sat down, rubbing her temples like she had a headache. "This is about Alex, isn't it? You're blowing this way out of proportion. He's just a kid." I stared at her, disbelief and frustration bubbling to the surface. "A kid? Mom, he's been tormenting me for years, and you've done nothing about it." "I'm done." For a second, I thought she might argue, that she'd try to stop me. But then she just nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "Fine," she said quietly. "If you're so determined to leave, I won't stop you. I'll even help you pack." The next morning, she kept her word. We gathered my things, what little I had, and loaded them into the car. She even drove me to the bus station. As we packed the last bag into the trunk, she turned to me and gave me one final look. Her eyes were filled with something I couldn't quite place. Regret? Guilt? "I hope you find what you're looking for, Sarah," she said softly. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and climbed into the car. As we pulled away from the house, I felt a storm of emotions swirling inside me: relief, fear, sadness, hope. For the first time in years, I was free. But that freedom came with a whole new set of challenges, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for what lay ahead. By the time I reached my 20s, I thought I'd left all of that behind: Richard, Alex, their toxic favoritism. I'd worked hard to build a life for myself, far away from that house. I didn't talk to Richard or Alex unless it was absolutely necessary, and my relationship with Mom was strained at best. I'd made peace with the fact that I wasn't really part of their family anymore. But then Richards will drag me back into their chaos in a way I never expected. It started with a phone call. Mom's name popped up on my screen, and I hesitated. I hadn't heard from her in months, and I wasn't sure I wanted to hear whatever she had to say. But against my better judgment, I answered. "Hi, Mom," I said cautiously. "Sarah, we need to talk," she began, her voice tense. My stomach tightened. "Okay," I said slowly. "What's going on?" "It's about Richard. He's sorting out his will." I felt a pit forming in my stomach. I knew this wasn't going to end well. "What does that have to do with me?" Her hesitation was all the answer I needed. "He's decided to leave his estate to Alex and Noah," she said, her voice wavering. "Because they're his biological sons," I finished for her, my chest tightening. I forced myself to sound calm, though my throat felt tight. "I figured as much." "Sarah, please don't take it personally," Mom said, but her voice lacked any real conviction. She sounded like she was reciting lines from a script, not offering comfort. "It's just his decision." I didn't respond. What was I supposed to say? That I was used to being treated like I didn't matter? That this was just another reminder I'd never truly been part of their family? The silence between us stretched, heavy and uncomfortable, until I finally mumbled something about needing to go and hung up. A few weeks later, I got an invitation to a family dinner. My first instinct was to toss it in the trash. I hadn't sat at that table in years, and I wasn't eager to start now. But curiosity got the better of me. Part of me wanted to see if Richard had the guts to look me in the eye after writing me out of his life so coldly. When I arrived, the tension was so thick it felt like walking into a room filled with smoke. Richard greeted me with his usual forced politeness, his handshake quick and mechanical. Alex barely glanced in my direction, too busy scrolling on his phone to bother acknowledging me. The only bright spot was Noah. Now a teenager, he was the only one who seemed genuinely happy to see me. He ran up and hugged me, grinning as he launched into a stream of updates about school and his soccer team. For a moment, I felt a pang of guilt. None of this was his fault, and I hated that the mess with the rest of the family might eventually drag him down too. Dinner itself was awkward, to say the least. Richard dominated the conversation, steering it toward Alex's latest achievements and Noah's college plans. Me? He didn't so much as glance in my direction. I stayed quiet, focusing on my plate, but my stomach churned with every passing second. Then Richard brought up the will. "I just want to make sure everyone understands," he said, setting his glass down with an air of authority. His eyes flicked toward me, sharp and pointed. "This decision isn't personal. It's about ensuring my legacy stays within the family." The words hit me like a slap. I froze, fork halfway to my mouth, staring at him. He had the audacity to say that in front of everyone, like I wasn't even there. "Not personal," I said, my voice trembling with barely contained anger. "You're literally telling me I'm not part of the family." Richard sighed like I was the unreasonable one. "Sarah, you've always gone your own way. You've made it clear you don't want anything to do with us." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Maybe that's because you've treated me like an outsider my entire life," I snapped, the words spilling out before I could stop them. "But sure, let's pretend this is all my fault." "Sarah, please," Mom said, her voice pleading. "No, Mom," I cut her off, turning to face her. "You let him treat me like this. You let him push me out. And now you expect me to just sit here and take it." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Even Alex, who usually had some snide remark at the ready, kept his mouth shut. After that disastrous dinner, I started hearing stories about Richard from other relatives, things I'd never known. Aunt Karen, who had always been a bit of a black sheep herself, reached out to me. "Don't let him get to you," she said over the phone. "He's always been like this, controlling, manipulative, always needing to have the upper hand. You're not the problem, Sarah. He is." She told me Richard had been pressuring Mom to cut ties with me completely, claiming I was too independent and disrespectful. "You're stronger than he gives you credit for," Aunt Karen said firmly. Her words hit me harder than I expected. For the first time, it felt like someone in the family was truly on my side. That conversation stuck with me, but things took an even more shocking turn when I learned Richard had been keeping secrets of his own. Through a mutual acquaintance, someone who clearly wasn't loyal to him, I discovered he'd set up a trust fund for Alex years ago. He'd never mentioned it to anyone, not even Mom. This wasn't just favoritism anymore. It was deception. I confronted Mom about it during one of our rare phone calls. "Did you know about the trust fund?" I asked, my voice sharp with frustration. She hesitated, and that pause was all the answer I needed. "Sarah, it's not what you think." "It's exactly what I think," I snapped. "He's been playing favorites my entire life, and you've let him." For once, she didn't have a snippy comeback. She just sighed, a long, weary sound, and said, "I'm sorry." The final straw came when Richard tried to drag Noah into his schemes. Noah had always been the family's peacekeeper, trying to smooth things over and stay neutral. But even he couldn't ignore the way Richard treated me. One day, out of the blue, Noah called me. His voice was hesitant but steady. "Sarah, I don't think it's fair what Dad's doing," he said. "You're my sister, and you deserve better." His words brought tears to my eyes. "Thank you, Noah," I said, my voice breaking. "That means more to me than you know." Hearing that from him gave me the strength to finally confront Richard head-on, not face-to-face, but in a way that gave me closure. I sat down and wrote him a letter, pouring out everything I'd wanted to say for years. I told him how his favoritism and exclusion had hurt me, how his actions had driven a wedge between me and Mom, how I was done letting him control any part of my life. I never got a response. But that was okay. Writing the letter wasn't about him. It was about me, taking back my power. Life has a strange way of throwing curveballs at you just when you think you've finally figured things out. For me, that curveball came in the form of an envelope, delivered on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. It was an otherwise uneventful day. I was at home, juggling freelance work and job applications. After cutting ties with Richard and Alex, I'd worked hard to build a stable, independent life. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. The bills were paid, there was food on the table, and for the first time in years, I didn't owe anyone anything. Then my phone rang. "Am I speaking with Sarah Daniels?" A calm, professional voice asked on the other end of the line. "Yes, this is Sarah," I said cautiously. "My name is Elizabeth Price," the woman continued. "I'm an attorney handling the estate of your aunt, Catherine Daniels. I regret to inform you that she passed away last month." I froze, the name catching me off guard. Aunt Catherine. The name stirred faint memories, but she was a distant relative I'd barely known. I vaguely remembered meeting her as a child, a quiet woman who lived far away. Aunt Catherine lived out west and kept mostly to herself. She never attended family gatherings or kept in touch. To be honest, I'd assumed she didn't care much for the family, or maybe she just wanted to avoid the chaos. I didn't even know she was still alive. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, unsure why the lawyer was calling me. "She left specific instructions to contact you directly," Elizabeth explained. "You've been named as the primary beneficiary in her will." For a second, I thought I misheard her. "I'm sorry." "What?" "You've inherited the majority of her estate, including a sum of approximately $10 million. My heart stopped. This had to be a mistake. "Are you sure you have the right person?" "Yes, Miss Daniels. Catherine was very clear in her will. If you're available, I'd like to meet with you to discuss the details and deliver a letter she wrote for you." A week later, I was sitting in Elizabeth's office, still half convinced there had been some kind of mix-up. The office was sleek and modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the city skyline. Elizabeth Price, a no-nonsense woman in a perfectly tailored suit, greeted me warmly before handing me a letter. "Catherine wanted you to read this before we proceed," she said, her voice kind but professional. I took the envelope with trembling hands. The paper was smooth and heavy, and the handwriting on the front was elegant yet firm, exactly how I imagined Catherine herself had been. I opened it slowly and began to read. "Dear Sarah, I know this letter might come as a shock. We didn't know each other well, but I've kept an eye on you over the years, through family updates and the occasional Christmas card your mother sent me. From what I've seen, you remind me a lot of myself, determined, resilient, and unafraid to forge your own path, even when it's difficult. I made my fortune through hard work and smart investments, and I've spent most of my life alone, by choice. But I've always admired those who can stand tall when the world seems determined to knock them down. You've faced challenges I can't imagine, and yet you've persevered. I hope this inheritance gives you the freedom to live life on your terms. Use it wisely, Sarah. And don't let anyone tell you who you're supposed to be. With admiration and love, Catherine." By the time I finished reading, my hands were shaking. I didn't know what to feel: gratitude, disbelief, even guilt. I hadn't done anything to deserve this. But somehow, Catherine had seen something in me, something worth rewarding. Elizabeth cleared her throat gently. "We can go over the details whenever you're ready," she said. The next few weeks were a whirlwind as my life transformed in ways I'd never imagined. Catherine's estate included $10 million in liquid assets, a sprawling ranch in Colorado, and a collection of rare artwork and antiques. I decided to sell the ranch. As beautiful as it was, I didn't see myself living out there. Most of the artwork was sold as well, though I kept a few pieces that held sentimental value, like a small painting of a sunrise that seemed to glow with warmth. With the money, I bought a house in the suburbs, a stunning $1.5 million property with large windows, a beautiful garden, and enough space to finally feel at home. It was more than I'd ever dreamed of, but it wasn't about luxury. It was about finally having stability and freedom, something I'd craved for so long. Managing the rest of the money was daunting. I wasn't about to squander Catherine's gift, so I hired a financial advisor, Clara, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who quickly became a trusted confidant. Clara treated me like an equal, explaining every decision in clear terms without a hint of condescension. "Remember, Sarah," she said during one of our meetings, "this money is a tool. It can give you freedom, but it can't fix everything. Use it to build the life you want, not the life others expect." Her words stuck with me. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was in control. Clara helped me diversify my investments: real estate, stocks, mutual funds, the works. We built a plan that balanced security with growth. Catherine's gift wasn't just money, it was a way to create a future I could be proud of. Of course, the news of my inheritance rippled through the family in no time. It wasn't long before Mom called me, her tone oddly cautious. "Sarah," she began, "I heard about Catherine's will." "Of course you did," I said dryly. "What do you want, Mom?" "I just wanted to say how proud I am of you," she said, though her voice lacked any real warmth. "Catherine clearly saw something special in you." I wasn't naive. I could practically hear the ulterior motive in her voice. "Is there a point to this conversation?" I asked. Well, she hesitated, and I could almost picture her twisting the phone cord nervously. I was just thinking, now that you're in a better financial position, maybe you could help out your family. Richard's been having some health issues, and Alex. Stop right there, I interrupted, my voice sharp. Richard and Alex made it clear years ago that I'm not part of the family. They don't get to come crawling back now that I have money. She tried to argue, but I wasn't having it. For the first time, I hung up on her, my heart pounding. But instead of guilt, I felt something else, a strange, empowering sense of freedom. The most surprising reaction came from Noah. One evening, he showed up at my doorstep, his hands stuffed in his pockets, his expression apologetic. I just wanted to say, "I'm happy for you," he said, his voice sincere. "You deserve this, Sarah." His words caught me off guard. "Thanks, Noah. That means a lot." I also wanted to say, "I'm sorry," he added, his voice heavy with guilt, "for everything Dad and Alex put you through. I didn't see it then, but I do now." Hearing that lifted a weight I didn't realize I'd been carrying. "You were just a kid, Noah," I said softly. "It wasn't your fault." For a moment, we stood there in comfortable silence. It felt like a small but significant step toward healing the only relationship in the family that still mattered to me. But I knew the peace wouldn't last long. When word of Catherine's inheritance reached the rest of the family, the subtle hints started. At first, it was small, casual inquiries disguised as polite conversation. A distant cousin would call, pretending to check in but steering the topic toward my newfound wealth. An uncle I hadn't heard from in years sent me a congratulatory email, his tone overly friendly and suspiciously interested. I knew what was coming. The vultures were circling. Alex showed up at my doorstep like he owned the place, his knock loud and impatient. When I opened the door, I was met with his usual cocky smirk. He leaned casually against the frame, as if he hadn't spent years making my life miserable. "Nice place," he said, his eyes scanning the entryway like he was already sizing up what he could take. "Figured you'd be living it up now with Aunt Catherine's money." "What do you want, Alex?" I asked, keeping my voice cold and steady. He shrugged, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. The audacity made my blood boil, but I held my ground. "I thought we could catch up," he said, feigning casualness. "You know, have a little family reunion. It's been a while." I crossed my arms, glaring at him. Cut to the chase. The smirk dropped, replaced by a hard edge I recognized all too well. "Fine," he snapped. "Look, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. Things have been tight for me lately. Work's been slow, bills are piling up, and I figured, since you're rolling in cash now, you could help me out." I let out a sharp laugh, disbelief mixing with anger. "Help you out? After everything you put me through? You've got some nerve, Alex." He stepped closer, his expression darkening. "Don't act like this is some big surprise. You've got more money than you know what to do with, and I'm your brother." "Half-brother," I corrected, my voice like ice. His jaw tightened, but he didn't back down. "Family's family," he said, his voice low and threatening. "You think you're too good for us now? Too good to help out the people who raised you?" That was it. I felt the dam break, years of resentment and anger flooding out. "You didn't raise me, Alex," I spat, my voice shaking with fury. "You bullied me. You stole from me. You made my life hell. And now you think you can waltz in here and guilt me into giving you a handout? Get the hell out of my house." "Don't be like this, Sarah," he said, his tone shifting to something almost pleading. "You owe me." That set me off. "I owe you," I said, my voice rising. "I don't owe you a damn thing. I worked for everything I have, Alex. And you, what have you done? Sat around waiting for someone else to clean up your messes." His face twisted with anger, and for a moment, I thought he might actually yell back. But instead, he sneered. "You've changed," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Guess all that money went straight to your head." "Get out," I said, my voice steady and final. For a moment, he just stood there, glaring at me. Then, without another word, he turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I stood there in the silence, my heart pounding, my hands trembling. It wasn't just anger. I felt a strange mix of emotions, including something I didn't expect, relief. For the first time, I wasn't the one retreating. I wasn't the one backing down. The vultures might keep circling, but I'd made my choice. Catherine's gift wasn't just about the money, it was about freedom. And I wasn't about to let anyone, not Alex, not Mom, not Richard, take that away from me. Alex showed up at my door one afternoon, unannounced as usual. He leaned casually against the doorframe, his signature cocky smirk plastered across his face like we were old friends. "Hey sis," he said smoothly. "Heard you came into some money. What do you want, Alex?" I asked flatly, not even trying to hide my irritation. "Come on, don't be like that," he said, holding up his hands in mock surrender. "I just thought we could talk, catch up." I crossed my arms, my gaze cold and unwavering. "You're wasting your time. I'm not giving you a dime." His smirk faltered for a split second, then turned into a sneer. "Wow, that's cold. After everything we've been through, you're just going to leave me hanging." I laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. "Everything we've been through? You mean the years you spent making my life hell?" "Yeah, I think I'll pass." He muttered something under his breath, probably an insult he didn't have the guts to say to my face, and stormed off, slamming the door on his way out. But I knew better than to think that was the last I'd hear from him. What I didn't expect was the parade of distant relatives crawling out of the woodwork like cockroaches. Cousins, great-aunts, second cousins twice removed, people I barely knew or hadn't spoken to in years suddenly remembered I existed. And wouldn't you know it, they were all so eager to reconnect. One cousin, Lisa, called me out of the blue. I hadn't seen her since we were kids, but she acted like we were lifelong best friends. "Sarah, it's so great to hear your voice," she gushed, her enthusiasm so fake it made my skin crawl. "I've been meaning to reach out for ages." "Really?" I said dryly. "Funny how you only decided to reach out after I inherited millions of dollars." Her laughter faltered, and I could practically hear her scrambling to recover. "Oh, come on, don't be like that. We're family." "Family?" I shot back, my voice icy. "I don't remember you ever inviting me to anything, or checking in on me when I was struggling. Don't pretend this is about anything other than money." She tried to backpedal, stammering something about just wanting to reconnect, but I ended the call before she could dig herself any deeper. But the most surprising and infuriating encounter came from someone I hadn't expected at all, Emily's brother, Brian. I'd always thought of Brian as a decent guy. We weren't close, but he'd always seemed grounded, even kind. Apparently, the news of my inheritance had changed that. I was sitting at a coffee shop one afternoon, enjoying some much-needed peace, when Brian slid into the seat across from me without so much as an invitation. "Hey, Sarah," he said, flashing a nervous grin. "Congrats on the windfall." I blinked at him, caught off guard. Thanks." He leaned forward, his tone overly casual. "Look, I was wondering if you'd consider investing in a little business venture I'm working on. It's a sure thing, just needs a bit of capital to get off the ground." I stared at him, completely incredulous. "Are you serious? We've barely spoken in years, and now you want me to fund your business?" "It's not like that," he protested, chuckling nervously. "I'm just giving you an opportunity to grow your money. A win-win." "Nice try," I said, my voice flat. "But no." His smile slipped, replaced by a flicker of frustration. "Come on, Sarah. You've got all this money now. You're telling me you can't spare a little for a solid investment?" I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "Brian, I didn't work my ass off and fight for my independence just to throw money at anyone who comes asking. Especially not someone who didn't care to talk to me until I became a walking ATM." His face reddened, and he muttered something about me being stingy before storming off. I sat there, shaking my head. It wasn't just about the money, it was about what it represented. 4 years, I'd been invisible to these people. The second I had something they wanted, they suddenly remembered I existed. But I wasn't that desperate kid anymore. Catherine's gift wasn't just financial, it was a reminder that I deserved better. And I wasn't about to let anyone take advantage of that. Brian left looking embarrassed, muttering something under his breath, while I sat there feeling a strange mix of anger and sadness. It seemed like no one saw me as a person anymore, just a walking ATM. It hurt more than I wanted to admit. Eventually, I decided enough was enough. If people weren't going to respect boundaries, I'd draw the line myself and make it public. For the first time in years, I posted something personal on social media. It wasn't my style, but it felt necessary. To everyone who has reached out to me about my inheritance, I am not a bank, a charity, or a financial savior. For years, many of you ignored me, dismissed me, or treated me like I didn't matter. Now that I have money, you suddenly remember I exist. Let me be clear, I will not be giving handouts to anyone. This money is mine, and I intend to use it to build a better life for myself. If you truly cared about me, you wouldn't need me to say this. Sarah. The backlash was immediate. Mom called me, her voice shrill with anger. Sarah, how could you post something like that? Do you have any idea how that makes us look? Alex sent a barrage of angry texts, each one more venomous than the last. Selfish. Ungrateful brat. You think you're better than us? Even distant relatives, people I hadn't spoken to in years, started chiming in, accusing me of being cruel and selfish. But for the first time in my life, I didn't care. Their opinions no longer had any power over me. This inheritance wasn't just about money, it was about my freedom. And I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. I thought I'd seen the worst of my family's greed. I was wrong. The demands, guilt trips, and manipulative phone calls were only the beginning. When Mom and Richard realized I wasn't going to cave, they escalated in ways I couldn't have imagined. What started as veiled threats turned into outright blackmail and eventually, a legal nightmare that would test every ounce of my resolve. The first sign of trouble came in the form of an unmarked envelope slipped under my door. My stomach churned as I opened it, revealing a typed letter and several grainy photographs. The letter was blunt and to the point. Sarah, you think you're so much better than us now that you have money, but you're not. We have proof of what you've done, and if you don't want this going public, you'll share what's rightfully ours. The attached photos were laughable. One showed me walking out of a bar with some co-workers. Another showed me talking to a man outside my house, probably a delivery guy. The last was of me handing cash to a homeless person. There was nothing incriminating about any of them, but the message was clear. They wanted to scare me into submission. I didn't panic. I called Clara, my lawyer, immediately. She had been a rock for me since the inheritance, and I trusted her completely. After I sent her photos of the letter and the pictures, she called me back, her voice calm but firm. This is amateur hour, she said. They have nothing. Don't respond and don't engage. If they escalate, we'll handle it. Her reassurance steadied me, but deep down, I knew this was far from over. If my family was desperate enough to try blackmail, who knew what else they were willing to do? Clara's calm confidence reassured me, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. A week later, I found out just how right I was. An official letter arrived, delivered by courier. It was from a lawyer representing Linda and Richard. My stomach sank as I skimmed the contents, each line more ridiculous than the last. They accused me of manipulating Catherine into leaving me her fortune and demanded a fair share of the inheritance as compensation for their supposed emotional distress and financial hardship. It was a blatant lie, but the audacity left me seething. Catherine's will had been meticulously drafted. There was no way they could contest it. Still, the thought of being dragged into a legal battle churned my stomach. Clara was livid when I showed her the letter. This is complete nonsense, she said, shaking her head. They don't have a leg to stand on. But we'll need to respond formally. Let me handle this. Over the next few weeks, things spiraled out of control. Linda and Richard escalated their threats and filed an official lawsuit. Their claim that I had coerced Catherine into leaving me her estate. They alleged that I had taken advantage of her age and mental state, despite the fact that I'd barely had any contact with her before her death. The accusations were absurd, but the stress was crushing. Clara brought in another lawyer, Anthony, who specialized in estate disputes. Anthony was sharp, no-nonsense, and had an uncanny ability to sniff out lies. Together, they began piecing together evidence to dismantle Linda and Richard's claims. This will is ironclad, Anthony assured me during one of our late-night meetings. Catherine's mental competency was verified by 2 independent doctors at the time she drafted it. We also have witnesses who can confirm she made this decision entirely on her own. Despite his reassurances, I couldn't help but feel anxious. The lawsuit consumed my life. Every day brought new accusations, more paperwork, and endless strategy meetings with Clara and Anthony. It felt like I was fighting a war on all fronts, and the enemy was relentless. Things took an even darker turn when Alex got involved. He started spreading rumors about me online, claiming I'd stolen the inheritance and destroyed the family. It didn't stop there. He created a fake social media account where he posted fabricated messages, making it look like I'd been bragging about manipulating Catherine. The posts gained traction, and soon, strangers were flooding my inbox with hateful messages. People I didn't even know were calling me a gold digger and accusing me of elder abuse. I tried to ignore it, but it was exhausting. For every step forward, it felt like I was being dragged 2 steps back. One evening, as I was reviewing documents with Clara, she suddenly froze, her eyes narrowing as she scanned a particular page of the lawsuit. "This is interesting," she muttered, pointing to a section of Linda and Richard's claim. "They're saying Catherine promised them part of her estate." I leaned closer, frowning. "What does that mean?" "They're alleging that Catherine verbally promised them a share of her assets," Clara explained, her tone measured. "If they can prove that, even with flimsy evidence, it could complicate things." "How could they possibly prove something like that?" I asked, panic creeping into my voice. Clara's lips pressed into a thin line. "They can't, not unless they've falsified documents or convinced someone to lie for them. Either way, it's something we need to watch closely." The idea of them fabricating evidence sent a chill down my spine. If they were willing to stoop to blackmail and public smears, who was to say they wouldn't go even further? But then Clara's expression shifted, her eyes lighting up as if she'd just cracked a code. "Wait," she said slowly, flipping back through the paperwork. "If they're claiming Catherine promised them a share, they'd need to provide some kind of record or corroboration. Let's dig into this. If we can prove they're lying, it could destroy their case entirely." For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could turn this around. "Money in writing?" Clara asked, her brow furrowed. "Do you have any idea what they're talking about?" "No," I said, genuinely confused. "Catherine never mentioned anything like that to me." Anthony leaned in, scanning the document with a critical eye. "If they're claiming there's a written agreement, they'll need to produce it in court. Let's see if they're bluffing." Sure enough, a few days later, their lawyer submitted what they claimed was a letter from Catherine stating her intention to divide her estate among the family. Clara and Anthony reviewed it together, and it didn't take long to spot the issues. The letter was poorly written, riddled with grammatical errors, and didn't even match Catherine's style. Clara held it up like it was garbage. "This is a forgery," she said flatly, her voice dripping with disdain. "And not even a good one." Anthony nodded. "We'll request a handwriting analysis. This will blow up in their faces." The case took a sharp turn during the deposition. Clara and Anthony didn't hold back, grilling Linda and Richard relentlessly. Every question chipped away at their credibility. Richard claimed Catherine had promised him money during a phone call. But when Anthony pressed him for details, he faltered. "When exactly was this call?" Anthony asked, his tone calm but relentless. I can't remember the exact date," Richard stammered, his face reddening. "And what did she say, specifically?" "Well, she said something about wanting to help the family. I don't remember the exact words." Linda tried to back him up, but her testimony contradicted his in several key areas. The more they talked, the deeper they dug themselves into a hole. Then came the handwriting analysis. The expert's report confirmed what we already knew. The letter was a complete forgery. The handwriting didn't match Catherine's at all. Instead, the analysis revealed a match with Richard's writing samples. When confronted with this evidence, their lawyer visibly paled. It was obvious their case was falling apart. Yet, despite the mounting evidence, Linda and Richard refused to back down, clinging to their lies until the bitter end. In the end, the judge dismissed the lawsuit with prejudice, meaning they couldn't file it again. Clara and Anthony didn't stop there. They'd filed a counterclaim for defamation and legal fees. The court ruled in our favor, ordering Linda and Richard to pay a hefty sum in damages. It was poetic justice, considering their greed. But the victory was bittersweet. While I was relieved the ordeal was over, the experience left me drained and deeply disillusioned. These were the people who were supposed to be my family, yet they'd gone to unimaginable lengths to tear me down. It was hard to reconcile that with the memories of who they used to be, or maybe who I'd once believed they were. Still, I refused to let them win. Catherine's gift had given me a new lease on life, and I wasn't going to let their bitterness ruin that. I focused on rebuilding. I surrounded myself with people who genuinely cared about me, cutting ties with those who didn't. It wasn't easy. Cutting contact with people you've known your whole life never is. There were moments I questioned myself, moments when the old doubts crept back in, whispering that I was the selfish one. But those moments grew fewer as time passed. Whether I was doing the right thing gnawed at me during quiet moments, but deep down, I knew I couldn't heal while still tethered to their toxicity. My first step was setting firm boundaries. After yet another spiteful text from Alex, this one accusing me of turning my back on family, I blocked his number. I didn't even hesitate. Then I called Mom and made it clear I wouldn't entertain any discussions about Richard, Alex, or money. Surprisingly, she didn't fight me on it. Maybe she sensed that I wasn't bluffing this time. With those ties cut, I started focusing on the relationships that truly mattered. Emily had been my rock through everything, and I leaned on her now more than ever. We started a new tradition. Friday nights were ours. We'd binge our favorite shows, eat way too much takeout, and laugh until we couldn't breathe. It was simple, but it reminded me of what real connection felt like. Her mom, Mrs. Taylor, still treated me like a second daughter. She never pried about my inheritance or the drama with my family. Instead, she checked in with me in her quiet, caring way, always asking if I was eating well or inviting me over for dinner. Her home felt like the safe haven I'd been searching for my whole life. Being around people like Emily and Mrs. Taylor helped me remember what unconditional support looked like, and that I deserved it. For the first time in years, I felt lighter.